Welcome everyone to Vision 8, Staffing Fundamentals, Lesson 4 on Qualification Standards. This training is foundational and specifically for HR staff. If we have any bargaining unit employees on the call at this time, we would ask that you would please log off, and we'll give you a moment to do so. This training is being recorded, and your attendance is your consent for that recording. We will conduct a question and answer segment at the end of this presentation. At that time, you can place your questions in the chat box or come off mute and voice any questions that you may have. We want to thank Bobby Kurtz for attending as the SME for this lesson. Our HRD introductions starts with our chief, Marcus James, HRD team members, my co-facilitator, HR specialist, Omira Bedworth, Lisette Lima, myself, Valerie McKinney, Samantha Montalvo, Angel Torres Morales, and Luis Torres. The best way to reach our entire HRD team is via our email group, our group email, vision8hrd@va.gov. Here is a listing of our 11-week agenda. It shows the titles of all our upcoming lessons. At the end of this training, you will be able to identify what qualification standards are. You'll be able to explain the difference between eligibility and qualification requirements. You'll know where to locate and how to utilize Title V and Title 38 qualification standards. And finally, identify the new bulletin update on notification of removal of VA qualification standards from VA Handbook 5005. Okay, let's begin with defining qualification standards, which is a statement of minimum requirements that an individual must meet to be qualified for entry or promotion into an occupation. Qualification standards help determine which applicants would be able to perform satisfactorily in the positions to be filled. They also help HR professionals determine the best qualified applicants for particular positions. Some qualification standards have specific educational, licensure, or certification requirements that may apply only to specific positions in an occupational series, such as nurses and physicians, to name a few. Okay, now that we have defined qualification standards, let's review specifics of job qualification, starting with work experience. Work experience, which include the types of work conducted over a period of time. Skills, such as exceptional typing skills or having the ability to type over 40 words per minute. Educational levels, for instance, having an undergraduate degree, such as a bachelor or master's, or a certificate of training. And finally, having an overall knowledge of a particular occupation series or field. Most qualification standards permit applicants to qualify on the basis of education/training and experience, or a combination of the two. Let's review eligibility versus qualification requirements. Eligibility refers to an applicant's ability to even be considered for an open position by first meeting eligibility laws and rules. There are several different hiring eligibilities in the federal government, and we call them hiring paths. As you can see on the slide, we have a USA Jobs screen with hiring paths. For example, some jobs are only open to current permanent employees, which simply means only current permanent employees are eligible to apply. Okay, qualifications. They represent the basic requirements, experience, and other job-related criteria necessary for a position. We note here that basic requirements could also include specialized experiences, such as needing certification or licensure to qualify for that position. Regardless of the applicant's qualifications, the applicant must also meet eligibility. On the USA Jobs application assessment. It will screen in those that meet eligibility and screen out the applicants that do not meet eligibility if they are outside of the area of consideration or hiring path. Okay, let's review the minimum eligibility for federal employment, which is U.S. citizenship. There is an exception for staff appointed under Title 38 per Title 38 USC 7407, noting the primary use has been particularly for physicians and dentists. For more information on this exception, we will provide the link for this HR note titled Staffing Hiring Non-Citizen Providers. Additional eligibility requirements for position recruitment may include, but are not limited to: was the application received by the closing or cutoff date? Has the candidate met all the procedural steps set out in the vacancy announcement or applying non-competitively? Has the candidate provided all the documents required? And do the documents clearly show eligibility under the applicable regulations? Documents such as SF50 or DD 214, just to name a few. And finally, is the applicant within the area of consideration?
Thank you so much, Valerie. I just need to give a disclaimer that I a bit sick. So if I have to cough and pause, please forgive me. I have all my little medicine here and tissue. So thank God that we have social distancing. Anyway, thank you, Valerie, for that. So we're looking at the overview of qualification standards. To start, Title V qualification standards are found on the OPM website. Now, this is only an overview, and we can probably do a class for each area that we'll mention today. But the purpose of this class is just to point you in the right direction, to show you what you're looking for. Okay. So when you go, you can notice on the screen that the Title V here is divided into two. It's divided into the general schedule. Let me see, use my little, the general schedule. And if you look at the OPM, that's what it says. And you look on the side of the screen, and it tells you that this one is for the GS schedule, qualification standards. It also includes an IOR, which we'll go into it a little bit further. And it will also include the qualification standards that contain a group of coverage qualification standards. On the right-hand side, you can see that there's a federal wage system, and it's also on the same OPM page. You know, it's very similar. It's actually below the GS. But for the wage grade, you will go to the federal wage system. And there you will see also that there's going to be a tab, and I'm sorry that this is too small, but there's a tab here that says job elements. And that's the difference, okay? The GS has qualification standards, group coverage qualifications. The wage system has job elements that focus on matching what the applicant can do against the work, what the work calls for. Now, this is called, in other terms, also an operating manual for qualification standards for general schedule positions. And as we stated, there's qualification standards, and these have been established by OPM, okay, for the GS positions. These standards describe the minimum qualifications required for each occupational series. Sometimes that will indicate education, age, experience, certification. These standards are written broadly for government-wide applications and are not intended to provide detailed information about specific qualification requirements for individual positions at a particular agency. That's really important to know. Now, standards include the patterns of education, training, and or experience most commonly applicable to a particular occupational series. Now, some qualification standards have specific educational, licensure, or certification requirements that are specific to that position. So with all this in mind, and with all looking at the picture, looking at the screen, with all this in mind, when you have to look up qualification standard, remember that you will not find VA specific information on these. Okay. All right. So now occupational series, and we're still under the GS schedule, qualification standards. Under this list, these are located by series, and on the screen you can see that I have circled. We are on the GS qualification standard. We are under the tab that says occupational series. And you can see that there's a list of series of 00 to 0099 and then and so on, right? I took for as an example the 300 series right here, just to use an example. And within that, if you're looking for the 301, which is the one that I use as an example, you will pull this standard, okay? Now, there's two of them, so you got to make sure that you pull the correct one, okay? Now, this is a busy screen, but please bear with me. I'm trying to break it down since our system is limited to go into the actual website, which is what I wanted it to do. So I had to use screenshots here. Now, let me see, let me make sure that all of my little, okay. So we're still under the GS schedule qualification standards. Now it includes an index of series, which we mentioned already, right? One of the tabs that has the series. It's very important to pull the correct standard for the series. Now under the group, there will be a line that says a list of the occupational series covered by this standard is provided below, and it has a hyperlink. And it's very small here, but you could see it here, okay? I'm gonna erase it just so we can. Okay. Now, the series are listed under that section. So when you look at the series, you're gonna see that it says group coverage qualification standards. On this one in particular, it says clerical administrative supporting position. But where did this come from? So the actual overview of the qualification standards, on the qualification standards, there's this section right here that indicates that the qualification standards have group coverage, okay? And it breaks it down into 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 groups, okay? These are the group coverage. So the qualification standard for a position is going to indicate if it's covered under a group coverage qualification standard, and it may be one of these, okay? If not, it's just going to state everything on that page for that series. But it's important that you know which qualification group standard you need to pull up for the position of the series, okay? Now, I just want to bring to your attention too that on the overview too of the GS qualification standards, there's also occupational series that are not assigned. And the one that sticks out here is the supervisory guide. So if you're recruiting supervisor, you want to take a look at that. That has 10 competencies that are important for positions for supervisors. All right. So we mentioned that the occupational standards include or may include individual occupational requirements. We know those as IORs. I can read you all of my notes here, but basically the IORs is a requirement. It provides additional information for that standard, saying what's required, what the position is requires, and some might be very small, very straight to the point, but like the one that's on the screen for the series 0018, it's a lengthy IOR. It requires education, it requires experience. I'm sorry, let me take that back. It requires education, or, so we got to pay attention to the ors on when we look things up. There's a lot of ors and ands. We got to pay attention because we can put the incorrect information if we're recruiting for that position, saying education is required, experience is required, certificate is required, when in here, it clearly states that is or, okay? So this one is a lengthy one, but it's a requirement, it's not an option, okay? And one indication that certain series have an IOR is that when you look at them under the links that are under the group coverage, they usually have an asterisk. I haven't been able to confirm them all, but the majority that I've looked have an asterisk, okay? Now, if the position does not have an IO, it's going to state it. It's going to say there's no individual occupational requirement for this series. Okay, so most Title V qualifications are found on the OPM qualification standards, which we just went over. But there's some Title V qualification standards that are found on the 5005 handbook. And when this happens, the qualification standard on the 5005 is going to take precedence. So how do you know if there's a Title V position in the qualification standards of the 5005. Well, you could just go directly to that section and see it, but you might want to check if there's anything that has been added new. A way to do that is you go to the Ochiko website. If you see here, this is the full version of the 5005. It indicates that it's through the changes 167. And when you look below that, it gives you like all of the different updates that have happened to the handbook, and it's broken down by years. So this one, I just opened it up, is for 2024, and it has all of these updates. Now, I only bring this one up because this is the latest update, the 167, which is the qualification standards for HR specialists, which is under Appendix F1 of the 5005. Okay. So unfortunately, my page got cut off up here, but the whole reference to this is 5005, Part 2, and it's Appendix F. Okay. And these positions, you can look at them and should be the Title 5 positions. Now, this is very basic. GS experience requires either general experience or specialized experience. When you pull up the standard, it's going to indicate it, and that's what you're going to look for. The arrows show it, the grade is there, but you want to read the entire, or review the entire qualification standard for any additional information. Now, I thought I could just show you screenshots, but I figure I'm going to break this down a little bit. So please bear with me. Those that know this stuff, remember, this is a very basic class. It's fundamentals. Those that have been in HR for quite some time might have shortcuts, might be able to do it differently. So I ask you to bear with me because this is a fundamental. So it is the very, very, very basic. So I'm going to just do a very to the basic. All right. So I put up the series 0671, which is the health system specialist. And as you can see, it has IOR, right? It has an individual occupational requirement, and it has all this information. Now, on the IOR, it also has this blue box at the bottom of the screen, this blue box over here, right? And it states related information associated group standard, use the group coverage qualification standard for administrative and management position for this series in conjunction with the individual occupational requirement described with the IOR. So along with this IOR here for the health system specialist, that's on this first page, you're going to go to the group coverage standards to make sure that you find all of the requirements. Okay. And we're looking for educational, but I figure I cover, step by step. So when you go to the group coverage standard, you could just probably click on the link, or you could just go to the tab. And this is the tab here. Now that's going to bring, it already told you which one you need to utilize. Okay. Because remember that I mentioned that before, that there's, I think, 5. So it tells you which one you need to look for the 071. And the 071, when you bring it up, it says administrative and management positions. I'm sorry, not the 071. When you go to the group coverage, you're going to pull up the section. And actually, it's very lengthy. So it's going to have first the clerical, it's going to have I can't remember the order, but it's going to have all of those sections. So you're going to scroll down until you find the one that says administrative and management position. And that's the one that's going to pertain to the 671 series. Okay. And there you will find your education, right? Your experience, grades, all of that information. You're going to find it there. Now, a really good way that I always, found beneficial is that below that whole section of the administrative and management position, they include occupational coverage. And when you look at that, it has all of the series that are covered under this group of qualification standards. And if you look at the bottom, I circled it here, it's kind of small, but the 071 series is listed there. So it just brings it full circle. Okay. Now, a very important note is that educational provisions referenced in the qualification standards are normally pertaining to high school, or above high school. Agencies are prohibited from requiring education for positions in the competitive service unless OPM has determined that the duties of the scientific, technical, or professional position cannot be performed by an individual who does not have that minimum education. Now, permitted only when OPM has determined that that work cannot be performed by the person who do not possess that education. So we cannot require education if it's not listed on the qualification standard, basically. I hope that that was helpful. Now, under the qualification standard, so if we kept going down the page on that qualification stand, that group coverage, we probably would have found if there was combination of education and experience, and it's pretty much stated. It tells you what it is that is considered, what you can combine and give the person credit, right? It even tells you on the actual, I don't know if all of them have it, but the majority that I remember looking up contain an example of how the education and the experience can be combined. And if you look here at the bottom, it gives you an example. It breaks it down into percentages, and the combination or the adding up of those percentages meets 100%. So you can qualify the person for the position. Okay. Now, OPM, under their qualification policies, they have indicator or have what kind of education. They have a table to show the level of education that typically is required for each grade. Okay. Now it's listed here, but just know that at the GS 13 and above, appropriate specialized experience is required for all positions. So education alone is not a qualifying for work for the GS 12 level and above, except when it's a research position. Okay. Other things to keep in mind that can be requirements too are listed on the screen: medical requirements, a motor vehicle, hazard, if there is a hazardous position, minimum age, if applicable. I can think of like firefighters that might have a minimum, if the agency states it, written and performance tests, licensure certification. So these are other types of requirements. Now, a federal wage system. So this is for your wage grade. Now, this is not, I don't know everything in HR. I have an extensive experience in HR, but this is the least that I have experience with. So I'm just only going to stick with the basics. And if anyone has any questions about this, I will gladly take it back, do further research, and provide you with an answer. But we're just going to go over the basics on the wage grade. Okay. Now, it is on the OPM site. And again, it's under that GS qualification standards. One thing about federal wage grade system qualification is that it's going to be compared to job elements. Okay. The knowledge, the skills, and the abilities of the applicants are compared to the job elements of the position. Okay. Now, for purposes of identifying sets of approved job elements, trade laborers are grouped into 5 categories. Now, the most utilized group has has jobs emphasizing trade knowledge. Examples: jobs requiring a skill and knowledge in a particular line of work. The other 4 categories, and you can see them all on the screen, are for the worker trainees, the support apprentice, and the high level supervisor. Now, the job under the series for the job, there will be job elements. And when you click on the tab, that's the job elements, it will take you to the different series, and you will find the series of the job that you're looking for, and it'll give you these elements. Now, it's good to point out that it has some screen out elements. So these are critical to perform the job satisfactorily. Okay. So when looking this up, you want to make sure that those are included. Now let's move on to the qualification standards for Title 38 and hybrid Title 38. Now, the Secretary of the VA has delegated authority to develop, approve, and publish qualification standards for 38 and hybrid 38 occupations, and some Title 5, as we mentioned before. To locate the 38 and the hybrid Title 38, you go to the 5005 handbook, you go to part 2, and you will find Appendix G, and here are all of our hybrids and Title 38 positions. These are all of their qualification standards. Now, I figure instead of just talking, I just showed you what the qualification standards of a position is. And it's important to know that when you deal with hybrids and Title 38, they have basic requirements for the position. This is the basics. They have to meet this, okay? And these are citizenship, education, license or certification, physical requirements, and English proficiency. And you can see this here, it's stated here that these are the basic requirements. Now, under the education, it's good to point out that there's these ORs that I mentioned before. And so when you are maybe drawing up an announcement, you want to make sure that you include all that, okay? And then these are just the basic requirements. And for this is actually the qualification standards for a psychologist, the 180 in series 180. Now, that same standard, this is not for that one. I didn't pull the same. Well, no, it is. I'm sorry. It is the staff psychologist. For the grade determination, KSAs and deviations, we're going to go over. So you need to meet the basic requirements, which I mentioned it was the citizenship, education, license, physical requirements, and proficiency of English. But you also have to meet the qualifications for that specific grade. So usually these are outlined where it has your entry level position, which is the staff psychologist, is right here. It says that there's no experience needed, but it indicates what the assignments are. Now, I just highlighted the GS12 just to highlight one because the GS13 was broken up into two different pages, so it was easier to just show something on one page. Now, the GS12, is the developmental position. It indicates what's the experience. It tells you what the KSAs are for that position, and it tells you what the assignment is. Now, when you pull up these qualification standards, especially those that are very clinical, they have become very extensive where they have, probably the GS9, 11, 12, 13, 14s, and may go all the way to the 15s. So you got to make sure that when you're looking up the qualification standard for the position that you need, according to that functional statement, whatever has been approved, that you look at the correct section. Just because it says GS12, don't automatically assume that is this one in particular that I have here highlighted. There might be a GS12 within that standard that has a different role. It might be a lead or a GS13 or a 14 that is a service chief or not a visiting position. So make sure that you go to the specific title for the position that you are recruiting for or qualifying somebody for, or whatever your case may be. Now, at the end of the qualification standard for the position, if there's a deviation, it's going to be stated and it's going to say it's going to look like this. So you got to pay attention to that as well. Now, so to wrap this up, this picture gives a quick overview of the qualification standards. There's basic requirements, there's the grade determination, and there might be a deviation. Now, with all of that said, the VA is always changing. We want to bring to your attention that a bulletin was released April 10th. And the bulletin basically is saying that there's coming changes for qualification standards. The RPPS, the Recruitment and Placement Policy team, is preparing to relocate the VA qualification standards from 505 to a secure repository SharePoint in the Ochico site. Now, excuse me. This is due to an increase in the VA qualification standards. And like I mentioned, some of these qualification standards are very extensive and very long. So they saw a fit, and it's made the handbook very difficult to maneuver. And I've noticed that it has even lost some search capabilities that it used to have. So with that, all of that said, they are trying to reduce the size of that 505, and they're going to move all those qualifications to a specific site online. Okay. Now, they're trying to do this by the end of the fiscal year of 2024, and they will provide final notice. And once they have it, they will also do some kind of training. Now, all that I just said is actually on the bulletin. So if you look at it, you should always look at these bulletins because it gives you details. Now, we just went over the qualification standards on OPM and on the VA Handbook 5005. Always stick with what is on the books. This is just alerting us that it's coming, but this should not throw us in a panic. This should not say, oh, we can't use the qualification standards or OPM anymore because they're changing it. Do not go down that route. You always go with what is on the books, what is stated on the books that is effective. This is just letting us know that is coming. So what we do, we go to OPM qualification standards, or the one for the wage grade on OPM, or the VA 505 handbook for the qualification standards. Okay. They actually even provided where is these are going to be housed. But if you go there, unless they did it this morning, there's really nothing. It's just pointing you in the direction. So do your Chico recruiting staffing site under this tab here, it's gonna tell you VA qualification standards. And if you go there, it's gonna take you to the titles really, or the series basically. But if you open them, there's nothing. At least the ones that I looked up do not have any information yet. Okay, so just be patient, don't worry. They will be updating this, but for now, we just stick to qualification standards on OPM and VA Handbook 5005. We'll just go over what we went over today. We basically went over minimum requirements. Eligibility refers to if the applicant is able to be considered for an open position by first meeting the eligibility rules. We went over qualifications, describing the experience, education, skills, and on-the-job related criteria necessary for a position. We also discussed the OPM's GS qualification standards that contain group coverage qualification standards as well as IORs to describe the minimum qualifications. We also went over the wage grade system qualification standards, which use a job element method to match the applicant against what the work calls for. We also went over the Title 38 and the hybrid Title 38 qualification standards that can be found on 5005, Part 2, Appendix G. And we also reviewed briefly the Title 5 positions that have specific VA-specific qualification standards that are found on 5005, Part 2, Appendix F. And lastly, we just made everyone aware or brought attention to the upcoming moving of the qualification standards from the 5005 to a secure repository SharePoint by the end of fiscal year 2024. Now, these are references. We will post them on the chat for your convenience and for your reference. And if there are any questions, now is the time. We will either open the lines or we will use the chat to ask your questions, and we can address them now. If we don't know the answer, we will take the question back and do further research and provide a response to everyone. So if there's any questions, now is the time. I take the silence that there's no questions. So if there's no questions, we will ask you to, if you don't mind, taking the time to do our survey, and it helps us correct anything that we can correct, enhance the things that we do well, and we appreciate your feedback. So thank you very much. And we thank you for all that you do. We encourage you to continue to do good work, keep a great attitude, and we thank you. Thank you for signing up for these classes. I hope they're beneficial for you and your teams. Thank you so much. Have a great rest of the day and week. Have a good one. Thank you all.